What's up, ladies and gentlemen, how's it going? It's Dan here from Cryonoir, and welcome to my game making journey part 30. This has been a long game making journey. Obviously there's parts 1 to 29 still to check out if this is your first one, but if not, let's just crack on and move on with the video. After the first couple of tutorials in Unreal, I was not feeling at all confident with C++. Although this is still early days of my C++ journey, the transition from GML to C# had been considerably easier than the transition from C# to C++. Still, you can't build Rome in a day, so I just carried on. The next tutorial in Bren Tristram's Unreal C++ course was a simple 2-room, 1-door puzzle kind of game that looked much more like the standard Unreal kind of thing. Step 1 was to bring in all of the assets that we needed, which was all part of a pre-built project, and this came with a door in it. Once this was in, we got to build in the game world, as in 2 rooms with a door connecting the two. During this part was the first section all about the materials editor. Using just a few tweakable parameters, we were able to create different looking materials for all the objects in the game. Next up, we began playing around with the door. We set it up so the door would open at game start, and that way we could confirm that the door opening code was working correctly. We then played around with the good old lerp system to make the door opening a little more believable. This took a little bit of trial and error, but it didn't take long to get it looking peachy. We then set up a trigger volume to open the door when the player entered the set area. This was followed by getting the door to close once the player left the trigger area, and make sure that it would close quick enough that the player couldn't just run straight through it before it closed. Once this was in place, we set up a line trace that would point out from the player's viewpoint. This way the player could interact with objects that were in a certain distance, say for example a cone or a cube. All that was left was to set up some code for picking up the cone or the cube, and we were about there. Has to be said, this section did give me a couple of Skyrim flashbacks. We then changed the trigger volume to calculate weight rather than just contact, and we had a very rudimentary puzzle. If the player stands in the volume, they weigh enough to trigger the door to open, so if they replace their weight with a cube and a cone, the door remains open, and presuming you're not a complete moron, you can then go through. For the next project, it was time to add a little bit of combat. Toon Tank started by setting up the project, importing the assets, and setting up a tank and turret class. Next job was to set up the camera and add a bit of movement. We then set up a proximity detector for the turrets and added a bit of code to make them face the tank at all times. A couple of classes later, and we had a timer for the turret firing and the tank turret being controlled by the mouse. Once a projectile object was set up and added, we were starting to have what would be described as a game. And that's about as far as I got with this course. Towards the back end of October, my trusty PC finally died. R2, as he'd become known, was the first PC that I'd ever built, and he had a very hard life. Considering he was built back in 2014 and had edited and rendered well over 100 videos, played thousands of hours of AAA titles, and worked in Game Maker, Unity and Unreal, and Blender, I really can't be mad. After a couple of hours of troubleshooting and a trip to my local independent PC specialist, we think the most likely culprit is the motherboard that's finally given up the ghost. So this put me in a bit of a tricky position. The X99 platform did not sell in huge numbers and is well and truly out of the mainstream circulation. Hitting eBay, there were a couple of refurb boards out there and a shed loads of these super sketchy looking straight from China knockoffs. So do I take a punt and buy a second hand board, or do I go and buy a new sketchy no brand Chinese one? The 5820K that was in R2 was definitely beginning to show its age at this point. After being overclocked for 6 years now and being absolutely beasted, the amount of overclock that would actually hold on the CPU had dropped quite considerably from 4.4 down to 3.9, and it made my i7 more comparable to a mid-range i5 now. Plus the 2070 that was in there was far from bleeding edge. If I was going to carry on with this whole enterprise, it was time for an upgrade. I made the difficult decision to sell off the bulk of my retro collection, a collection that had taken me many years to build up, and decided it was time to get in touch with Scam. So after a month and a half wait, I am now the proud owner of Ryzen 9 5900X 12-core CPU and an RTX 3080, so hopefully this should all be well and good for getting into Unreal Engine 5. One of the downsides from swapping over to a new machine is that obviously I've now had to reinstall all of my old software as well, and I'm having difficulty finding versions of Unreal Engine that will work with these tutorials. These tutorials are actually from like quite a while ago, so they were using, I think it was 4.2. And there was lots of variants within 4.2, and it would appear you can't get them all now. There was only one you can get, and 4.2, and I've tried 4.3 and a couple of others, and a lot of the projects won't load. And some of them will load in newer versions, but they've got horrendous visual artifacts and all sorts of stuff going on. So to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do now. I think I'm going to just start another tutorial series just from scratch. I have another one that was lined up that I intended on doing, and I think I am just going to play around with Unreal Engine 5. My sort of experience from doing Xamarin, I sort of learnt an awful lot more just by doing and then by looking up things when I got stuck than I ever did. I didn't really do any of the sort of tutorials. I watched a few tutorials through, but that was it. I didn't really get too heavily involved in running through tutorial series. I just basically started building stuff and playing around. So I think that's probably the approach I'm going to take with Unreal 5. But I don't know. I will do some things. There will be some content hopefully coming up on the channel. But this is why I've disappeared for a little while. I've been completely unable to do any of my major workflow. But I haven't been standing still. I have not been standing still. You will notice on the homepage or on my channel page, you'll see there's now a link to the website. I actually have a Cryonoir website is now up and loaded. As far as I'm aware, it's not searchable on Google yet, but if you go into if you just go up into your address bar and just type in www.cryonoir.com, and that should take you straight to the main page. It's not entirely finished. There's still a few things that need ironing out and sorting out, but yeah, now I have a website up and running, and it's none of this Squarespace malarkey. It's a completely built-in WordPress, so it's completely it's a completely made thing rather than just an entirely in a template. But yeah, so it's all so that's all good. So there'll be some new stuff coming up, some Unreal Engine 5 videos coming up very shortly, and whenever I've done my next tutorial set or whatever I feel an appropriate time, I'll be doing a new game making journey, level. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out this merch, and now you can check out the website. Follow me on all of the usual things, Insta and yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm starting to use Twitter now. And Facebook, blah blah blah, you know all the shit. I'm sure you know you don't care, nobody cares. I'm just talking into the void. Probably not the best thing for a video. Oh fucking hell. Anyway, take it easy guys. I will see you on. See you later. Bye bye.